yourself, ask me anything you might have. Or you can raise your hand, post it on chat window, whatever works for the group.
Sweet.
Do you see my screen?
Yep, I see it. Oh, I think you get unmute, man. There we go.
Thanks
Cool.
for letting me know. Hey everyone. Uh, a very good morning, afternoon, good evening, good night, depending upon wherever you're joining us from. I see people joining from New Zealand, from uh, Dallas, from St. Louis, from UK. So I welcome you all to my session. I hope you and your family are staying safe and staying healthy in this pandemic. My name is Vaibhav Gujral, and in this session, we will be talking about Microsoft Azure Well Architected Framework. The session is a very high level discussion on what Microsoft Azure Well Architected Framework is. As Bill was mentioning earlier, it is not possible to cover everything in depth within 1 hour. But I would like to assure you that by the time you will leave this presentation, you will have a fair understanding of what Azure Well Architected Framework is and how you can get started. Quick intro about me. My name is Vaibhav Gujral. I have over 15 years of experience. I was born and brought up in India. I moved to Omaha, Nebraska in 2016. I currently work for Kiewit Corporation, which is one of the North America's top constructions firm as a cloud architect. I work in their technology group. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. I have several certifications that I've earned in Azure. I do speak at different user groups and conferences like this one. I do run Omaha Azure user group. If you are interested in checking more about that user group, head out to the website that I have listed down there. We do conduct meetings every 2 weeks, and I would be sharing my contact information towards the end of the presentation, just in case if you would like to reach out to me offline after the presentation. With that, let's get started with today's presentation. Before we jump on to Azure Well Architected Framework, I would like to ask everyone who is in this meeting to answer a question for me. Do you think is your cloud environment well architected? Do you think it has all the characteristics required to be qualified as a well architected or a well designed environment? You can raise your hand, unmute yourself if you know answer for that, or you can unmute yourself, answer or chat, put it on chat too.
There's always room for improvement.
That's a good answer, safe answer. Okay, Gary has the right answer. That you for a reason. All right, so yeah, let me take a step back and first ask you actually what is a well-architected cloud environment before you answer if your cloud environment is well architected or not. But here is, in my personal opinion, a well-architected cloud framework has five main characteristics. It is very cost effective. It maximizes your return on investment. It is built and designed using modern DevOps practices. It delivers high performance and uses the right set of cloud resources in achieving that level of performance. It is certainly reliable and fault tolerant in case of an outage or a disaster. It fails over and ensures my business continues without a major impact. And last but not least, it is secure. So now you have got an idea what a well-architected cloud environment might look like. So if I go back to my question, can you answer it now? Can you say that your cloud environment is cost-effective, reliable, and secure? Can you say that it offers high performance and it is built and designed using modern DevOps practices? If your answer is yes, then awesome. If no, or if you don't know, maybe. If your answer is maybe, then don't worry, uh, because that's true for most of the organizations. And likewise, if you are new to cloud, you are still trying to move to cloud, or you are in middle of migration to cloud, then it becomes essential for you to architect and design your environment the right way with the considerations for all the different characteristics that I spoke about in the last slide. So in a nutshell, if you well architect your cloud environment, it will certainly pay you off really, really well. Let's touch upon a shared responsibility model. So when you speak of any public cloud, it is very, very essential to understand that cloud works on a shared responsibility model. If you think that moving your workloads to the cloud will make the cloud provider responsible for everything, then you are highly mistaken. So I'm here to break that myth. Cloud works on a shared responsibility model between you as a consumer and Microsoft as a cloud provider. Unlike a traditional on-premises environment that you can see towards the very left, where you are solely responsible for everything based on the cloud service model that you opt for. As you move towards the right, the cloud provider manages certain aspects of your workloads. So if you're running your services, let's say in infrastructure as a service or IaaS, then the cloud provider or the cloud vendor is responsible for certain aspects like the physical infrastructure and the virtualization layers. And you as a consumer are responsible for patching your operating system, updating your middleware and runtimes. And last but not the least, you own your application and data, hence you manage those. If you move one step further up and you start using platform as a service or PaaS in short, then you just own and manage your application and data. The underlying infrastructure, the virtualization layer, the operating system, the necessary runtimes and libraries are all managed by cloud provider. Then under the last service model known as software as a service or SaaS in short, cloud provider manages everything from the physical infrastructure to the application deployment to everything in the stack, and you just consume the application and data over internet. And so as you can see with each service model, the responsibilities are shared between the consumer and the cloud provider. And why I'm touching upon this is because the shared responsibility model plays a key role in your architectural decisions. Before we discuss well-architected framework, it's always good to be aware of the shared responsibility model. Why? Because these decisions can have implications on your cost, on your security, on the technical and operational capabilities of your application. And by shifting some of these responsibilities to cloud provider, you can certainly focus on bringing value to your application business and move away from activities that are not core to your business. So let's jump onto the topic for tonight. Let's talk about Microsoft Azure Well-Architected Framework. The Azure Well-Architected Framework is a set of 5 core principles. I did touch upon these in one of the earlier slides where I did listed 5 characteristics. You can see towards the right, I have pictures showing those 5 pillars. And these 5 core pillars help enterprises to build high quality solutions on Azure. And to be very clear, Microsoft has not invented any of these pillars for architected framework. Instead, these are built on top of industry standards and recommendations. In fact, if you will go and check it out, Amazon and Google also offer similar frameworks to help the customers design their cloud environments the right way. In fact, my Amazon also calls their well-architected framework as well-architected framework. Now, that being said, this is all based on industry standards and applies to generally to all the public clouds. But be aware that there is no one size fits all approach here when you are designing your cloud architecture. There are some universal principles that apply regardless of the architecture you are designing or the technology you are using or the cloud provider you are using. These concepts are not all inclusive in themselves, but baselining your cloud architecture on top of these principles can really help you build a reliable and scalable and secure environment. The 5 pillars, as I was mentioning, are cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security. Under the cost optimization pillar, the recommendation is to design your cloud environment so that It is cost effective for your operations and development teams. Basically, you ensure that you are spending money where you are getting maximum return on investment. In the process, what really happens is you bring in efficiency in your overall cloud expenditure, and you avoid any wastage of money. You don't spend any money which is not needed. Moving on to operational excellence pillar, the recommendation is to take advantage of modern development practices, aka DevOps, which results in faster development and deployment cycles. You need the right monitoring strategy in place so that you can detect failures and problems before they happen or even before they are noticed by your customers in production environments. Another aspect that you should consider under operational excellence pillar is automation. Under performance efficiency, the recommendation is to properly match resource capacity to demand so that your workload can perform well and can scale as needed. Azure offers a feature known as auto scaling, if any one of you is aware of, which lets you scale resources up or down dynamically based on the load in your application. In a nutshell, under performance efficiency, the recommendation is to design your architecture with performance and scalability in mind. Next on list is reliability. As the name suggests, it recommends that you should design your system while anticipating failures at all levels. Now, any one of you can you tell me what is the greatest fear of any IT team? What could be the greatest fear of IT teams who support these enterprise systems?
Microsoft crashing, Azure crashing.
Outage. So yeah, security breach is one of those for sure. So in my opinion, the greatest fear is the fear of system going down with no way of recovering it. So BCPDR, Andrew, good point. So systems can go down. Essentially, it's running in Microsoft's data center. Things can go wrong, even though our application is designed correctly, but it can still, if there is an outage, it can result in loss in revenue. So in a nutshell, failures are inevitable. They are bound to happen somewhere, sometime. You cannot really escape failures. So what essentially the reliability pillar focuses on, that it recommends to design the cloud environment in such a way that it doesn't fail at the first place. And if at all it fails, it recovers from the failure in a graceful manner within the stipulated time. Lastly, security. I think security is underrated always. People overlook security. It is, even though everyone understand that why security matters. I was showing the shared responsibility model in the earlier slide. So based on what we as a consumer are responsible for, we really need to architect our cloud environment with the right set of security mechanisms in place. The security pillar essentially focuses on securing different areas of our cloud environment, ranging from the infrastructure to the platform services to our applications and data. It might mean encrypting our data, protecting our applications against DDoS attacks. Identity is another piece of security that plays a key role in this pillar. And so in the upcoming slides, we will certainly touch upon each of these pillars in details. I will share certain principles that we can follow under each of these pillars to well architect or well design our cloud environment. I will show in a demo, but be aware that if Microsoft does offers an assessment review, which you can conduct against your cloud environment, and you can generate an overall score and actionable recommendations on where you stand against well-architected framework. I will certainly show you a quick demo how you can get started with that assessment towards the end of the presentation. So now let's start jumping onto each of these pillars in details and see what each of these pillars entail to, and what are some of the high-level key principles that you can follow to ensure that you score high under each of these pillars. So let's talk about the first pillar in more details, which is the cost optimization. In my opinion, cost is always a fascinating factor. Whatever decisions an organization is taking, cost always plays a key role. Same principle applies for cloud. When you are opting for a cloud provider or you are deciding to run your workload in cloud, cost certainly plays a key role. So utilizing cloud computing for your business needs essentially needs a shift in mindset to start with. Quite essentially, it requires you to shift your mindset from CapEx to OpEx model, capital expense to operational expense. In traditional on-premises environment, if you manage any on-prem data centers, then you will be aware that you have to pay upfront cost for procuring any physical hardware and other equipment. You can certainly claim that as tax deductions by showing them as capital expense on your tax returns. But when you move to cloud, that changes the dynamics completely. You literally don't pay anything upfront. Instead, you move to a model where you pay for whatever you use. The capital expense in that case is zero, and you essentially get a regular operating expense in your invoice. Microsoft sends you a monthly bill with all the charges for the resources that you have consumed in the past 30 days. So shifting to an OpEx model forces you to be very cost effective and cost efficient in your choices. The primary reason being you will really not realize until your invoice shows up that it might be surprised. I've seen and heard from so many customers that they don't really plan for the cost well upfront for cloud. And when the monthly bill shows up in their email box, they really get a huge shock. So in a nutshell, you must consume your cloud services in an optimized manner. Be aware that it's not free. It's based on a pay-as-you-go model. And that is one of the motivating reasons to consider the very first principle that I have listed there under the pillar. Before you provision anything in Azure, it's critical that you go and plan and estimate your costs upfront. You can use any cost estimation tool of your choice, which gives you a holistic estimate of your total cost to move to cloud. Microsoft offers a couple of great tools that you can utilize for this purpose. It's known as Pricing Calculator, which is offered by Microsoft on Azure's website. You can utilize the same to get an initial estimate of how much it will cost you on a monthly basis. You can pull all the resources that you are planning to provision, and it will give you a rough estimate. You can apply your enterprise agreement discounts and MSAL discounts and see how much it will cost based on your billing model. You can also use something known as a TCO calculator that Microsoft offers to calculate total cost of ownership of running your workloads in cloud. So what it's essentially these tools ensure is that you are prepared for how much your consumption will be in cloud, and you will not get a shocking monthly bill. So it, as per first principle, it's very essential that you estimate your costs upfront and inform business about the estimated cost for running your workloads in Azure, or rather any public cloud. Next principle is around cost optimization. So it's not just enough to estimate your initial costs. You should also keep looking for ways to optimizing your cloud spend. By optimizing your cloud spend, you can maximize your ROI, return on investment. There are many considerations to optimize your costs. For example, you should answer questions like, should we consider IaaS VMs to run SQL Server, or are we better off running an Azure SQL database, which is a PaaS offering? Can we utilize options like reservations and hybrid benefits to bring down some of our costs? So always keep looking for such opportunities where you can optimize your existing spend. The third principle is around monitoring and analytics to gain access uh, into your Azure spend. You must leverage monitoring and analytic tools available at your disposal to monitor your cloud spend and generate meaningful insights out of it. By looking at some of the historical cost information, you can easily trend and identify the areas where you can reduce cost and eliminate any wastage. Azure offers a full-fledged cost management solution known as Azure Cost Management and Billing. It gives you all the cost information in a rich interface embedded inside Azure portal. It lets you see just not the historical cost, but it also lets you see future cost based on your historical usage. You can further apply different kinds of filters. You can filter based on reservations, based on subscriptions, based on resource groups. In a nutshell, you must have enough visibility into your cloud spend, and you must understand how you are being billed for consuming whatever cloud services you are consuming. That is what the third principle relates to by saying monitoring and analytics. Lastly, the what hurts the most is those unnecessary expenses within your environment that could have been easily avoided. The last pillar addresses that concern. You must put in time in identifying these leakages. The sooner you identify those, the better it will be. In most of the cases, the reason for wastage I have seen in some of the projects I have worked on is people go ahead and choose wrong sizes for their resources. For example, resources are provisioned with way more capacity than what they really need. For example, I've seen people provisioning virtual machines, which could be highly underutilized, meaning the average CPU consumption or the memory consumption is not even 10% or 20%. And organizations still keep paying for those higher sizes. So it might be an ideal candidate to be downsized, any virtual machine which is underutilized. So, and it's just not the infrastructure cost. You can also look at some of the operational costs. You can automate your deployments. You can automate your resource provisioning to save some dollars on your man hours to provision resources in Azure. So what last principle really talks about is whatever you're spending, ensure that it's efficient and always look for ways how you can make your cloud spend efficient. So in a nutshell, in conclusion, for this particular pillar, cost certainly plays the most important role in your architecture. While designing your cloud environment, always be aware of cost, always be aware of how much it is going to cost you before you go ahead and provision those resources. Here are some quick ways you can optimize your overall Azure spend. I believe most of them are self-explanatory, but to just talk about them, I think it's not a no, it's a no-brainer that you should shut down any resources which are not used. Always remember that you are built for what you provision, regardless of the usage. So that's where it gets tricky whenever any of these cloud provider companies advertise about their public clouds. They say it's a pay-as-you-go model, but be aware that it's not pay-as-you-go, it's pay-as-you-provision. So you go ahead and provision your Azure resources, Microsoft starts charging you. Microsoft doesn't care if you are using those resources or not. Till the time those resources exist, Microsoft is going to charge you. So always be aware of your usage and shut down any resources which are unused. The second thing you can do is right sizing. I did touched upon wrong sizing in the last slide as well. So always right size the underused resources. Don't allocate capacity more than what is needed by your resources. As a thumb rule, what I personally do is I always start with smallest size that I think is right for my workload. And then I continuously monitor my workload. And as and when I get enough data to justify scaling up, I certainly go ahead and scale up the resource to the next tier or next size. But as a thumb rule, as I said, I always start small. If you are an enterprise customer for Microsoft, you can leverage reservations and hybrid benefit to certainly bring down your overall costs. And reservations can really bring down your cost substantially. I've seen where customers have saved up to from 50 to 70% of their costs on their virtual machines and storage accounts. If you are not aware of what reservations are, reservations lets you book capacity upfront at a heavy discount, meaning you pay for certain capacity upfront, and Microsoft offers that capacity at a heavy discount. Then against the pay, if you will consume the same capacity at pay-as-you-go charges, it would be expensive to you. If you're not aware of what hybrid benefit is, it lets you bring in your existing Windows and SQL Server licenses to the resources that you are running in cloud. To move forward, to handle any variable or fluctuating workload, I did mention about auto scaling in my last slide too. You can certainly utilize auto scaling on the resource types that supports it to scale your resources up and down based on the activity. Next on list is budgets and cost allocations, which helps you make costs visible and make people accountable for Azure spend. I think in my past experience, I have seen till that time leadership and business don't pay or see how much money they are spending on Azure, they don't really feel accountable for any of the Azure spend. So try utilizing budgets and cost allocations. That will really help you in making people accountable for what they are spending in Azure. Last but not the least, always choose the right compute service. You might be better off using a PaaS SQL database at $10 a month compared to running a full-blown virtual machines at a few $100s a month. So always choose the right service, what fits in your solution. Moving on, the next pillar is operational excellence. So I'm keeping an eye on chat as well. If there is any question, you might post it on the chat window, or feel free to unmute yourself to ask me if you have any question. Talking about operational excellence, it is all about ensuring that you have full visibility into how your application is running and ensuring the best experience for your end customers. Operational excellence includes making your development and release practices more agile, which allows your businesses to quickly adjust to changes. There are, like the cost optimization pillar, there are several principles that you can consider under this pillar. The first one emphasizes on designing, building, and orchestrating with modern practices, aka DevOps. You must leverage processes like infrastructure as code, automation testing, automated deployments wherever possible. Always remember that DevOps is more about culture than technical areas. You really need to drive that cultural change in your organization so that DevOps can be embraced regardless of the regardless of the size of your organization or the development practices that are followed in your organization. I strongly believe that DevOps can be embraced and built into the system. The next principle is talks about monitoring and analytics. Sorry. Similar to the cost optimization pillar, monitoring and analytics plays a key role in this pillar as well. You must have a monitoring, logging, and instrumentation system built into your overall architecture so that you can gain visibility into what is going on in your environment. You can use cloud native tooling like Azure Monitor, which includes log analytics and application insights, or you can most certainly go and leverage third-party monitoring solutions as well to integrate with your system. But the idea is to have that appropriate monitoring and analytics tooling integrated in your architecture. Why? Because having a stable monitoring solution established in your architecture can really help you multifold. It can help you troubleshoot and resolve performance issues. It can help you generate insights into usage information of your workloads and so on. Next on the list of the principles is automation. I can keep telling on about the benefits of automation, and the rest of the 30 to 40 minutes will be over, but I'm not going to do that. I believe automation is no brainer. I remember the very first thing I was told when I started my first job by my lead was that anything that can be automated should be automated. So I still try to follow that principle. Why? Because it helps bringing operational costs down. And just not the operational costs down, it also helps reducing errors in your process. If I have to do something manually twice, chances are I will end up having two different outputs. But if I automate it, if I run the same script multiple times, it will always return the same result. So it does reduces errors in your overall process as the amount of overall human interaction goes down. And automation can certainly help you ensure that any activities that you're performing, as I was saying, those activities are performed in the same way, no matter how many times you execute those activities. You can utilize automation in areas like application deployments, where you are deploying your codes or where you are provisioning these resources in Azure. Automation can go really a long way. Last but not the least, the fourth principle I have listed under operational excellence talks about testing. I would be surprised if anyone who is attending this session today comes to me and say they have not seen an angry customer finding bugs in the production system. I would. It has happened with me. I'm sure it would have happened with most of the people who are in this call. And trust me, 99% of those situations can be avoided if testing is included in our process to catch mistakes before they impact the real customers in production. So essentially, the last principle essentially focuses on testing. Uh, it essentially says that having a reduced number of reported issues by having a right set of testing tools and testing integration in our process can certainly improve overall user experience and operational excellence. Now, I'm sure everyone here who is on this call would have seen a message like this when you when your application goes down. For example, I'm sure you would have faced the issue when you would be shopping on Amazon during Prime Day, when the Amazon website sometimes goes down. The primary reason is the volume of users for these e-commerce websites during these days go 100 or 1,000 fold. It has nothing to do with their application code. Essentially, what it essentially relates to is the underlying resource capacity and scalability. What happens is whenever the resource or the volume of users goes 100 or 1,000 fold, due to the increased volumes, the underlying resources are stressed. And as a result, the overall website becomes either too slow or it becomes too unresponsive. And the primary reason is that kind of load was not planned for by the organization. And to address that exact situation, I want to move to the next pillar called as performance efficiency. In a nutshell, performance efficiency refers to matching the resource capacity with the demand. Performance efficiency includes scaling your resources, identifying and optimizing potential bottlenecks, optimizing your application code for peak performance. There are some core principles that you can certainly leverage under this pillar as well. The first one is around scalability, which is a no-brainer. It speaks about scaling up and scaling out. It is very essential to understand the difference between scaling up and scaling down. Compute resources in Azure can be scaled in two different directions. You can either scale them up or you can scale them out. Scaling up is adding more resources to a single instance. For example, adding more CPU power or adding more memory to an existing virtual machine. Whereas scaling out is adding more instances. What I mean is instead of making a single instance more powerful, if you are scaling out, you create replicas of your instance and load balance the incoming request. Now, be aware that scaling up also comes with certain limits because obviously you cannot scale up your instances to the capacity more than what is available in the underlying physical host that is hosting the resource. That's where scaling out scores big time because theoretically you can add as many instances as you would need. Be aware that costs play a key role in your decision making here. I know it sounds very fancy to scale up or scale out as the demand increases, but be aware that it also increases your cost. You can leverage a feature I did touched upon in earlier slides called as auto scaling for some of the resource types that support it. If the resource type you are working on it does support scaling auto scaling, then you can certainly utilize auto scaling to dynamically scale up your resources, scale out your resources up or down based on the activity in your application. And whenever your application is not seeing the usage, it reduces the number of instances. And you can optimize your overall cost by utilizing auto scaling. We have been utilizing auto scaling for resources like app services, where it automatically scales out to between 1 to 10 to 20 different instances. In a nutshell, the idea is that you should provision resources as and when they need, not like you should just spin them up and leave them running even if they are not required. The next on the list is network performance. When you are working on achieving an optimal performance out of your environment, networking resources play a key role. You have to plan and design the right set of networking resources to ensure that there are no network latencies or any kind of performance issues related to networking. You might also leverage messaging patterns to make your systems loosely coupled. The benefit you get out of having a messaging layer in between your subsystems is that if your receiver takes more time to process each request than the rate at which the sender is sending the messages, your system doesn't fail because you have a messaging queue in between. Your sender keeps writing messages in that queue, and the receiver keeps picking up the messages from the queue, and they both work independently. Similar to networking and messaging, storage performance also plays a key role in your overall performance. Speaking of storage, you must choose your partitioning strategy wisely so that you can maximize your benefits using cloud. If your partitions are not balanced, it might hit the performance of your system really hard. Having right partitioning strategies also makes it easier to scale your system and improve overall performance. You must also consider caching to improve performance of your systems. If you have been using Redis, there is a Redis cache offering that Microsoft has that you can probably utilize in your applications. Last but not the least, it's also important to identify the performance bottlenecks in your system. These days, systems are complex and they can have many subsystems. Performance of each of those subsystems can contribute to the overall performance of your system. It is important to have right set of performance monitoring tools in place so that you can measure performance of different parts of your system, be it storage, compute, networking, or your application. Not only at the infrastructure side of things, your applications themselves might be the cause of a low performance. Hence, it is critical to have right set of monitoring built into your environment so that you can pinpoint the bottleneck and you can fix them. As I've mentioned in one of the earlier slides, you can utilize things like application insights or Azure Monitor to integrate with your system to have better monitoring. In my opinion, it is no brainer that your cloud applications must deliver high performance, and you must utilize the right set of principles and design patterns in your architecture to ensure that you receive optimal performance for which you are paying for. The next pillar on the list is reliability. In one of my starting slides, I did ask about the greatest fear IT teams have. And as I said, it's the fear of system going down, completely down without being recoverable. And most of the businesses are going digital and global now. Any of these businesses cannot afford systems going down whenever there is a failure or an outage. The reliability pillar addresses that particular concern. Reliability pillar does provides guidance on how you can make your environment reliable and fault tolerant. It helps you make your applications resilient and highly available so that they can handle both localized as well as broad impacted incidents. If you will think about it, it is actually very scary and a very critical aspect. A downtime directly hurts revenue. Imagine an e-commerce website like Amazon. If it is down for half a day, just imagine how much revenue it might lose. So in a nutshell, the reliability pillar doesn't say that you should not expect failures. Instead, it says otherwise. It says failures are inevitable. No matter how much prepared you are, failures are bound to happen. And no cloud provider, including Microsoft or Amazon or Google, offer 100% SLAs on their services. The maximum SLA that you can get is 5 nines. So what really matters is how prepared you are in case something goes down or if something fails. Now, it could be any component of your architecture that might fail. It could be your application code. It could be your data. It could be a networking misconfiguration, which might result in your application becoming unreachable. It might also be the physical infrastructure, like the physical hard drives might fail. There are a couple of principles that you must consider while you are thinking about reliability of your cloud environments. The first one says that you must build a highly available architecture. When you are designing your environment, always consider the SLA offered by Microsoft or rather any cloud provider from whom you are consuming cloud services. Be double sure that you consider the SLA for every service you are going to consume. And if the SLA doesn't meet your business continuity requirements, you must plan for high availability by adding appropriate redundancy in your systems. The other principle speaks about recovering from a failure. So what high availability focuses on, by having high availability, chances of failing is reduced. But just in case if there is a failure, the second principle talks about recovering from that. So you must design your environment so that it can recover gracefully whenever a failure occurs. As a best practice, you must always have a recovery point objective and recovery time objective defined for your workload, RPO and RTO in short. If you are not aware of, RPO refers to the maximum duration of acceptable data loss. It is measured in units of time and not actually the volume of data that is lost. Likewise, recovery time objective or RTO refers to the maximum duration of acceptable downtime or the maximum duration that the system can be down. For example, if the acceptable downtime duration is 4 hours in the event of an outage, then your RTO is 4 hours. So why do you need to establish RPO and RTO? Because it will essentially help you in designing the right capabilities in your architecture to meet reliability objectives. So in my opinion, that's the first thing that you should do in your cloud architecture: identify and establish RPO and RTO, and then follow those two principles that I've listed there. All right, the last pillar, this one is no brainer. Security is all about protecting your environment from outside threat. So it starts with protecting your data that your organization uses, stores, and transmits. The data that your organization stores or handles is at the heart of your securable assets. Now the data exists on some kind of infrastructure, which also needs to be secured along with the identities that are used to access the data. It is highly important to have your complete security posture right so that your data is safe and secure in cloud. Like the other principles, there are few key principles that you might like to utilize under security pillar. To start with, you must develop a defense in depth approach to securing your architecture. I have my next slide on defense in depth approach to talk about what it is all about. But in a nutshell, what it says is it requires you to make all the layers of your architecture secure. The other two are pretty straightforward. You must always choose the right set of technologies to secure your Azure infrastructure. It could be as simple as using network security groups or using an Azure firewall. Also, as I said earlier, it's important to secure the identities that can access your data. You must leverage industry best practices for managing your identities. You must also utilize features like Azure role-based access control to restrict access to your Azure resources, and things like privileged identity management to manage control and access to important resources in your environment. Let's talk about defense in depth. It is a security risk management approach that defines multiple layers of security controls in an IT environment. It's just not specific to cloud, but we can apply this to a cloud environment too. The idea is if a security attack is not caught by one layer, it will most probably be caught by the next. The multiple layers that you are seeing here increase the overall security score of your environment and reduces the probability of a security breach by a huge margin. Sometimes defense in depth is also referred to as castle defense, as it resembles the security defense technique employed in the castles historically, where an enemy had to cross multiple barriers at the castle's periphery before attacking the castle. With the rapid expansion of cloud computing, the need for defense in depth strategy has increased many folds. And what I'm showing you on the screen is a snapshot of the different security layers in an environment. At the very core, as I was touching upon in the last slide, is data, which must be encrypted both at rest as well as at transit. The next is application, where you must secure your application access by using services like Azure Application Gateways or Web Application Firewall. The next layer is your compute layer, which must be protected against potential threats like RDP brute force attacks or SQL injection. You can utilize services like Azure Security Center to generate a secure score for your overall security posture. Then is network, which enables different components to talk to each other. It is no brainer why you must secure your networks, and for doing so you can utilize services like network security groups. Then comes the perimeter from which forms the most common form of attack. One of the example could be distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks. Azure comes with a basic tier of DDoS, which is enabled by default, but you can certainly go ahead and opt for standard tier that comes with additional support options. Then is our identities. We did talked about earlier as well. We should certainly secure the identities that are trying to access our resources and data. And lastly, the access to the physical data centers must also be authorized, since it's a cloud environment that we are talking about, which is hosted by Microsoft and Azure's data center. The physical security is managed by Microsoft, which only allows authorized personnel to have access to the different areas of their data centers. I have listed a link down there for a blog post I have written some time back. You can certainly check that out if you want to read more about defense in-depth security model. Lastly, I did touch upon shared responsibility model, and I would like to refine it to security so that it sets a perspective. What you are seeing here is a shared responsibility model that I have tweaked to reflect the context of security. What you are essentially looking here is, depending on the type of service that you select, some of the security is built into the service by the cloud provider, Microsoft in this case, while other remains the customer's responsibility. As you can see, it is absolutely essential to use the right set of services and then have the right set of security controls to ensure that your overall security posture in the cloud is intact. I did mention about the myth where people consider that once they move everything to cloud, it's cloud provider's responsibility to ensure everything is secure. That's not right. As you can see, part of that responsibility lies on the consumer. So be aware of that and apply appropriate security controls to keep your system environment secure. Now, I did briefed about all the 5 pillars of the well-architected framework. As I've said earlier, there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the cloud architecture. The 5 pillars we talked about offers the guiding principles that we can include in our design whenever we are architecting our cloud environment. And as I've said in the past, cost plays a key role in that process. Regardless of whichever pillar you focus on, it might be reliability, security, operational excellence, or performance efficiency. Any any pillar that you focus on, and any corresponding changes that you make in your architecture, be aware that it impacts our overall Azure cost. For an example, let's take an example. To make your systems more reliable, the recommendation is to introduce redundancy. Now, redundancy means adding more resources in your design, and the more the resources you consume, the higher will be your Azure cost, and Microsoft is going to charge you for that. So it's kind of a balancing act between cost and rest of the pillars. You must always consider the trade-offs between the cost and the other pillars whenever you are architecting your cloud environment. And once you have identified the priorities for your organization and the trade-offs, always remember that there is always a scope for cost optimization. Any questions so far? I don't see anything on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask anything. So moving on top of the guiding principles and the 5 pillars that we talked about, Microsoft does offer an assessment review, which you can take yourself. It is essentially a set of questionnaire targeted for different pillars in well-architected framework. It essentially asks you to provide different information. Once you provide all the required information, it generates a score depicting where you stand against each pillar. And it also provides a set of actionable recommendations that you can take a reference from, and you can go ahead and make appropriate changes in your environment. This is where once you go through the assessment, this is how it shows the result. As you can see, the different recommendations that it's showing, as well as some of the actionable recommendations. Let me go back actually to browser and show you some of the things we have talked about. So if you have not seen Azure Architecture Center, I would strongly encourage you to go and check out Azure Architecture Center. Under Azure Architecture Center, you will find a separate section for Microsoft Azure Well Architected Framework. And under that section, you will find essentially everything we have spoken today. It talks about all those 5 pillars: cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security. And if you will go inside each of those sections, you can find all the principles that are recommended under that pillar. I did pick up some of the key ones from there, but you can certainly find few more here. You can go to either of those, read about each of those pillars in details. You can certainly find more principles and check out. It's very vast. It might take some time for you to go through all this and digest this information. If this is too much for you, another option for you is to go to Microsoft Learn. There is a learning path for learning about Azure Well Architected Framework. It has an introduction module, then it has one module for each of the pillars that you can walk through. And each of them is roughly around 45 to 50 minutes long. And you can learn, you can go through it at your own pace. Here's the assessment page that I was referring to in my slide deck. Microsoft offers certain different categories of assessments that you can go through. One of them is Azure Well Architected Framework. I was trying to go through this link, but once you click on that, it opens up Azure Well Architected review page for you. As you can see, it asks you what all do you want to assess. You can choose one or more or all 5 of these pillars if you want to assess. You can certainly sign in with your Azure portal credentials, which you have used to create an Azure account. You can give a name to your assessment. Once you will give it a name, if you'll go back here, you will see all your past assessments listed under your assessment section. If I go back here, you will see I didn't do anything, but I'll go ahead and click here. I will go ahead and choose, let's say, cost optimization pillar. So you will see it does list down all the different questions that it asks. I can go and click on next, and to the best of my knowledge of my cloud environment, I can go ahead and answer all these questions. If you are not aware of how to answer, Microsoft does offer some video sources that you can go through to develop an understanding on how to answer some of these questions. So let's say if I go through some of these questions, the first question is like, how are you modeling cloud costs of this workload? So I can opt for whatever. Let's say if I'm trying to use hybrid benefit, I'm trying to utilize reservations, and I'm clear on the price model, and I know cloud costs are modeled. So I can go through roughly each of these and try to answer based on certain options, whatever works for my environment. I'm not going to go through in depth for each of those. And based on whatever understanding I have for my environment, if I go here and fill it up, it will generate a set of score for me and a set of actionable recommendations that I can go ahead and act upon to make my overall well-architected score go up. Let me quickly go and wrap up this questionnaire. And if I'll click on view guidance, as you will see, it rates my overall design to be moderate. And if you will see, I have not really assessed any of the other pillars. It has assessed me to be in moderate against all the principles under cost optimization pillar. It has given me a score of 38 out of 100. And if I will go here are all the recommended actions or the actionable recommendations that it has for me. I can certainly go through each one of those and evaluate what makes sense for my organization and certainly utilize them. So going back to the slide deck, another tool that you can utilize to assess your well-architected environment is called as Azure Advisor. It's a free offering available in Azure portal. It's embedded in Azure portal. If you'll go to your Azure account and search for Azure Advisor, it comes up with this interface. Oops. As you can see, it gives you a set of score as well as recommendations of against well-architected framework where your cloud environment stands. What you are seeing here on the screen is against each of the pillars. You can see in cost, and Azure Advisor has assessed my cloud environment and it recommends certain changes in my environment, one of high impact, three of medium impact, one of low impact. And if I would go ahead and make those changes, it can result in roughly $2,000 of saving on a yearly basis. Under security pillar, there are 63 recommendation and it impacts 522 resources and so on. What I can do is if I go and click on these recommendations, I can see each of those recommendations in detail, what each of those recommendations are. For example, here you can see the recommendations I have open for reliability, and it does says that I should add more virtual machines for improving fault tolerance, or I should use availability sets for improving fault tolerance. I should use premium disk to improve my overall IO performance. Then I can go up level further and I can click on one of these and I can see what resources it impacts. For example, the screenshot I have here shows the virtual machines which are wrong sized, which either I can shut down completely or I can right size them to save some good dollars. What you are seeing here on the screen is all the list of virtual machines and the appropriate recommended action of resizing or shutting down, and the potential saving I can have by acting upon each of those recommendations. Recently, Microsoft, not recently, I guess a year or two ago, Microsoft also introduced what is known as an Azure Advisor score. What it essentially does is it helps you provide a score so that you can assess your overall posture of your cloud environment. As you can see, it gives you an overall score here towards the left, which is shown as 88%. Then it also shows an historical trend of your score, which might be very helpful in ensuring that you are on your right, if you are on right track or not. For example, you can see I'm 82% on track for cost. On reliability, I'm on 82%. In security, it says coming soon, but it's already being released. So you can find same in Azure portal under security as well. Now, that's pretty much about Azure well-architected framework, Azure Advisor, how you can assess your cloud environment against well-architected framework and how you can get started. Microsoft on top of that has also provided a good chunk of design patterns that you can use while designing your cloud environment in accordance with the well-architected framework. Each of these patterns describe the problem that the pattern is trying to address. It also provides certain considerations that you should have while applying the pattern in your architecture. And for most of these patterns, Microsoft has also provided examples on how you can implement these patterns in Microsoft Azure using different resources. Now, do note that most of these patterns are applicable to any distributed system, whether hosted or on Azure or AWS or any other cloud. So these are again industry standards, but you can certainly utilize them in your Azure environment. Another thing that you should not get confused with, in addition to Azure well-architected framework, you can also leverage what is known as cloud adoption framework. If you are moving to cloud or you are in halfway in your cloud journey, Cloud Adoption Framework can really help you better align your business and technical strategies to your cloud implementation. It provides you with best practices, documentation, and tools that your cloud teams, and including architects and IT professionals and administrators, and any decision makers in your team can utilize to successfully achieve the objectives that you have from your cloud implementation. As you can see, there are 6 main phases. It all starts with defining your strategy, understanding the motivations, why you really want to move to cloud, why do you want to create resources in cloud, what workloads do you want to migrate and why. Once you have that, then you start planning how you should get started. You look for skill readiness. You work on a cloud adoption plan, how you're going to adopt the overall cloud services. Then you move to the ready stage where you start with your landing zone. You start with small, you set up the base resources, you start with the basic uh, necessities so that you can build your other systems on top of it. Then you move to the adopt stage where you roll it out to different teams to run their workloads in Azure. Once that's done, once you have an up and running Azure environment, you go ahead and start governing and managing your Azure environment. So I have provided a link down below there. If you are interested, you can check out that link to read more about Cloud Adoption Framework. In addition to everything we have talked about today, there are some consistent design principles that you should consider throughout your architecture. To start with, always enable architectural evolution. So no, there is no architecture that is static. Technology always keeps evolving. So always allow for the evolution of your architecture by taking advantage of new services, new tools, new technologies whenever they are available. You should use data to make decisions. Whatever decisions you make, ensure that those decisions are data driven. You should collect data, analyze it, and use it to make decisions that surrounds your architecture. From cost data to performance to user load, using data will certainly guide you to make the right and informed decisions in your environment. Educate and enable. Cloud technology evolves quickly. So educate your development, operations, and business teams to help them make the right decisions and build solutions to solve business problems. Document and share configurations, decisions, best practices as much as you can within your organization so that uh, people who work on cloud have appropriate knowledge to work on that. Automate. We touched upon automation in a couple of our principles in our pillars in well-architected framework. Automation of manual activities reduces operational cost, minimizes errors introduced by human intervention, and it does provides consistency between your environments. So some general design principles that you can certainly consider along with well-architected framework. With that, let me quickly jump back to Azure, to my browser. So I don't have literally any resources running in my environment today in Azure. That's why you are seeing in Azure Advisor, I'm in the blade for Azure Advisor. You can go and certainly search for Azure Advisor here and go to Azure Advisor. That is where I am in. Based on your environment, it will automatically assess and it will give you the recommendations and score across the 5 different pillars. You can check out your advisor score here. It shows 100% because I don't really have anything running. It says I am 74% in reliability, but I'm doing pretty good in cost, operational excellence, and performance. I can certainly go and dig into each of these pillars. If I have recommendations that advisor has for me, it will show up here. Likewise for any other pillar. You can head out to Azure Advisor documentation to read about what recommendations it makes against each of the well-architected framework principles. If you will head out to further documentation, you can find out different recommendations that it makes against different pillars. For example, I'm into reliability page. What it does is it gives you recommendations across different resource types. For example, if you are using application gateway, ensure that you have fault tolerance. Ensure that you protect your virtual machine data from accidental deletions by having resource locks or backups. Ensure that you have access to Azure experts when you need it. So all different kinds of recommendations that you can go through here for your review. If there is anything that applies to your specific Azure environment, it will show up here. So in a summary, we have talked a lot in last hour or so. So I would like to conclude now with an overall summary of what we have discussed so far. Architecture is the foundation of your application design. So using the Azure well-architected framework can give you the confidence that your applications can sustainably meet the needs of your customers, both now as well as in the future. The architectural priorities and needs of every application is different. But the 5 pillars that we discussed today in Azure Well-Architected Framework are an excellent guidepost that you can use to make sure that you have given enough attention to every aspect of your application. Again, as a reminder, the 5 pillars that we talked today: cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security. Focusing on those pillars will certainly ensure that you are laying a solid foundation for your application in the cloud. With a solid foundation, you will be able to drive innovation through your environment. You can build solutions that your users will love, and you will certainly foster the trust of your end customers. Here are some of the resources that I was showing you earlier and that I have referenced in my presentation today. I have provided link to the Azure Well-Architected Framework documentation. I've also provided link to the Microsoft Learning Path that I was showing you. I've also provided link to the assessment that I was showing, as well as the link to the Azure Architecture Center. I have provided link to the cloud design patterns and cloud adoption framework too. I can share the slide deck with Bill and Veronica and the organizers. You can set, if possible, they can share it with you so that you can get access to these links. While I was preparing for today's session, I came across a new document with new documentation for partners, which I found to be really interesting. This is essentially for partners who support different customers. They have a page for well-architected framework, and it essentially covers pretty much what we have discussed today, but I did really liked it. It does refers to all the how-to guides and reference materials that talk about well-architected framework, all the how you can start with assessment, how you can learn about that, and it talks about all the 5 different pillars and talk about how you can get started with each of those. Has certain videos that you can watch and certain other resources that you can utilize for helping your customers if you are a partner. And with that, the floor is open for any questions that you might have for me. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask me or post it in chat. I see a question. So Gary asked, does Advisor tells you when you should move to Cosmos DB and moves away from SQL Server? I guess no, but it does recommends when you should optimize your Cosmos DB and SQL servers, but it doesn't suggest any migrations between Cosmos DB and SQL servers. Just in case, if you don't have anything to ask now, but you come across anything later, you can certainly reach out to me offline. I've listed my blog there. You can check out the Defense in Depth article I have written some time back, as well as some of the other articles I have written. You can reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I've provided my Twitter handle as well as my LinkedIn profile. I'm pretty active on both of those social media platforms. I try to be active on my YouTube channel, trying to build up on it. It's still not where I would like to see it, but you can go and check out some of the videos I have published before. And if you would like to reach out to me over email, there is my email address. You can feel free to send me email and I'll try my best to respond back as quickly as I can. And if there are no other questions, there's no questions, anyone has nothing to ask, I guess I can conclude my presentation. And thank you once again all for joining. Stay healthy, stay safe. I believe Delta variant is going nuts, so mask mandates are coming again. So if it comes back, start wearing your mask and enjoy your evenings. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, big time. It's such a fascinating topic, architecture and making technology decisions and operational decisions. And I would guess that if we had a whole day or 3 days, you could have kept talking the whole time because there's so much depth to this material.
Microsoft conducts 1 or 2 day workshops on well-architected framework if you're getting started with it. So
makes a lot of sense. Well, you've certainly given us a fantastic set of, like, the principles are all there, the framework we understand, and there are tons of details that we can drill into because we know where to start now. So I'm going to give you a big thank you. and let everybody know that this talk will appear on the YouTube channel. It's, I think it's just YouTube/Boston Azure. And we have talks, a bunch of talks coming up. We have the talk on by Serby on August 5th. That's locking down SQL DB. And then we have several other talks that should be appearing soon after that. So watch the meetup space. Vaibhav, thank you again. And everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, Bill, I will send across